There are 25 things that can make your cruise steward think you hate them, and the wild part is, a lot of passengers do these things without even realizing how rude, messy, awkward, or frustrating they come across. Because most cruise stewards are not expecting perfection. They know cabins get messy. They know people are on holiday. They know families, kids, food, wet towels, and luggage can turn a room upside down fast. But there is a huge difference between normal holiday mess and the kind of behavior that makes a steward walk in, look around, and think, "Oh no, not this cabin again." And honestly, some of the worst ones are not even the obvious things. It is the little habits, the tone, the timing, the unrealistic expectations, and the stuff passengers do that quietly makes one of the hardest jobs on the ship even harder. So in this video, we are going through 25 things that make your cruise steward think you hate them, including some that people do every single day, some that are just plain rude, and a few that can make your cabin crew dread knocking on your door. If you love cruising, hit the like button, and let's get into it. Number 1. Ignoring them when they introduce themselves on day 1. This one might seem small, but it says a lot straight away. On the first day of the cruise, your steward will often stop by, smile, introduce themselves, and let you know they are the person looking after your cabin for the whole trip. It is a quick moment, but it matters more than a lot of passengers realize. Because when someone opens the door, barely looks at them, keeps doing whatever they are doing, or acts like the steward is just part of the furniture, it gives off a very cold vibe. You may not mean it that way. You might be busy unpacking, trying to get settled, figuring out the room, or rushing to get to the buffet before everyone else. But from the steward's side, it can feel like, right, this person cannot even be bothered saying hello. And cruise stewards notice that stuff immediately. They are reading the room from day 1. They can usually tell very quickly which cabins are going to be friendly, easygoing, respectful, and which ones are going to be awkward, demanding, or just plain rude. Now to be fair, you do not need to turn it into some long chat. Nobody is saying you need to stand there for 10 minutes asking about their life story. But if someone is going to be cleaning your room, refreshing your towels, helping with little problems, and looking after your space all week, the least you can do is look up, smile, and say hello like they are an actual human being. Because if the very first thing your steward gets from you is total indifference, there is a good chance they are already thinking, "Oh great, this cabin is going to be one of those." Number 2. Treating them like a servant instead of a person. This is a big one, because cruise stewards are there to help you, but some passengers take that way too far and start acting like the steward is not even a real person. They click their fingers, talk down to them, bark out requests, or use that cold, bossy tone that instantly makes the whole interaction feel ugly. And the worst part is, some people probably do not even hear themselves. They think they are just being direct. But there is a massive difference between being clear and being rude. Your steward is not your personal servant. They are a crew member looking after a huge number of cabins, working long hours, and doing one of the hardest jobs on the ship. So when a passenger starts acting entitled, like every little request should be handled immediately with a smile and zero effort, it absolutely leaves an impression. Because from the steward's side, it is not just one request. It is the attitude behind it. It is that feeling of being spoken to like they are beneath you instead of just being another human doing their job. If you want extra pillows, fresh towels, or help with something in the room, that is fine. Ask. That is part of the job, but how you ask matters a lot more than people think, because the second you start treating your cruise steward like they are there to serve your ego, not just your cabin, that is when they really start thinking, "Yep, this person cannot stand me." Number 3. Making a huge mess right after they just cleaned. This is one of the fastest ways to make your cruise steward feel like you do not appreciate a thing they just did. They come in, tidy the room, make the bed, sort the bathroom, take away the rubbish, freshen everything up, and then barely any time passes before the cabin looks like a small tornado has gone through it again. Now, obviously, you are on holiday. People change clothes, use towels, grab things, unpack, and live in the room. Nobody expects it to stay perfect all day. That is not the issue. The issue is when passengers seem almost careless about it, like the second the steward leaves, they just throw everything everywhere without a second thought. And from the steward's side, that can feel pretty discouraging. Because they are not just cleaning one room. They are doing cabin after cabin after cabin, trying to keep on top of everything, and when one room constantly goes from fresh and tidy to total disaster within minutes, It starts to feel like the people in there have no respect for the work at all. It is even worse when the mess is needless. Wet towels on the floor, rubbish left everywhere, clothes all over the bed they just made, bathroom counters instantly covered in a new layer of chaos. That is the kind of thing that makes a steward think, wow, these people really do not care. So no, you do not need to tiptoe around your own cabin like you are in a museum. But if someone has just spent time making your room look nice, turning it back into a pigsty straight away is definitely one of those things that makes your cruise steward think you hate them. Number 4. Demanding things in a rude or snappy tone. This is one of the quickest ways to make your cruise steward feel like you cannot stand them, because even a normal request can sound awful when it is delivered with attitude. And some passengers do this without even thinking. They are tired, hot, impatient, maybe stressed, and suddenly everything comes out sounding sharp, cold, or bossy. The thing is, most cruise stewards are used to requests. Extra towels, more hangers, fresh ice, a blanket, a mattress topper, help with the room safe. That is all normal. The request itself is usually not the problem. It is the tone. It is the difference between, could I please get a couple more towels when you have a chance? And, I need more towels. Bring them now. And yes, your steward will notice that difference immediately. Because when you speak to someone in that clipped, irritated way, it sends the message that you do not respect them. You do not care how busy they are, and you expect them to just absorb your bad mood because you are the passenger. Now, nobody is saying you have to sound fake or overly sweet. Just normal human politeness goes a long way. A please, a thank you, a calm tone, a little patience. That's all it takes to keep the interaction feeling decent instead of nasty. Because if every time your steward hears your voice, it comes with a snap, a sigh, or a barked-out demand, they are absolutely going to start thinking, yep, this person really acts like they hate me. Number 5. Leaving the cabin in total chaos every single day. There is a difference between a cabin looking lived in and a cabin looking like somebody gave up completely, and cruise stewards know that difference instantly. A few clothes out, a couple of towels, maybe shoes by the bed, that is normal holiday stuff. But when the room is in total chaos every single day, that is when it starts feeling personal. We are talking clothes everywhere, wet towels dumped on the floor, rubbish piling up, the bathroom looking trashed, bags exploded open, food left out, and every surface covered in random stuff. At that point, your steward is not just doing a quick tidy and refresh. They are walking into a mini disaster zone over and over again. And yes, people are on holiday. Nobody expects military-level neatness. But when a room is consistently that bad, it sends a message. It says, you do not care how much harder you're making someone else's job. It says you expect the mess to magically disappear because that is what the steward is there for. That is the part people miss. A cruise steward is not just cleaning up after you once. They are dealing with the same difficult cabins day after day, and if yours is the one that always looks like it lost a fight, they are definitely noticing. Because when your room is in total chaos every single day, your cruise steward is not thinking these people are just having fun. They are thinking these people do not care at all. Number 6. Calling them constantly for tiny things you could do yourself. This is the kind of thing that really starts to wear a cruise steward down, because one small request is not a big deal, but 10 pointless little interruptions scattered through the day absolutely are. And some passengers do this without realizing how much they are breaking up the steward's workflow. Your steward is not just floating around waiting outside your door in case you suddenly need one extra hanger, want to know why the TV remote looks different, or cannot be bothered walking 2 steps to switch the bathroom light off yourself. They are usually cleaning multiple cabins, changing bedding, sorting bathrooms, handling special requests, and racing the clock all day long. So when someone keeps calling them back again and again for tiny things they easily could have handled on their own, it starts to feel less like normal service and more like being treated as somebody's personal on-demand helper. Especially when the requests are not even urgent. It is just constant little things, one after another, that eat up time and make everything harder. Now, obviously, if you genuinely need help, ask. That is what they are there for. But there is a big difference between needing help and making someone stop their work every 5 minutes because you do not want to solve the smallest problem yourself. Because if your steward keeps seeing your door as the cabin that always has one more tiny request, one more little interruption, one more unnecessary call, they are definitely not thinking these people are easy to look after. Number 7. Letting wet towels pile up everywhere. This probably seems like no big deal to some passengers, but from a steward's point of view, it is one of those habits that quickly starts to feel lazy, messy, and a bit gross. Wet towels on the floor, wet towels on the bed, wet towels over chairs, wet towels hanging off random places in the bathroom. It all makes the cabin feel more chaotic than it needs to. And the problem is not just that there are towels everywhere, it is that wet towels make everything feel nastier. They can make the room smell damp, they make it harder to tell what is clean and what is used, and they turn a simple cabin refresh into more of a soggy little cleanup mission. Now, obviously, people use towels. That is normal. You are showering, swimming, maybe coming back from the beach, maybe dealing with kids. So yes, there are going to be towels. But there is a big difference between using towels and acting like they can just be dumped wherever they land because someone else will sort it out. That is the part that makes your steward notice. Because when they walk into a room and it looks like a towel explosion happened in there, it gives off the vibe that you are not even trying to keep things remotely manageable. Because leaving wet towels piled up everywhere is one of those little things that makes your cruise steward think, wow, these people really do not care what I have to deal with. Number 8, taking forever to leave when they are clearly trying to service the room. This is one of those things passengers often do without meaning any harm, but it can still drive a steward mad. You are in and out of the cabin, still getting dressed, sitting there watching TV, slowly packing a beach bag, or just sort of lingering while your steward is clearly waiting for the room to be free so they can actually do their job. And yes, technically it is your room for the cruise. Of course it is. But when a steward has a long list of cabins to get through and keeps circling back because one room is never properly available, that starts to become a real problem. It throws off their rhythm, eats into their time, and makes the whole day harder than it needs to be. What makes it worse is when passengers can see exactly what is happening and still move at snail pace. The steward is there with the cart, the door is half open, the cleaning is obviously meant to happen now, and yet some people still act like there is no rush at all. From the steward's side, that can feel incredibly inconsiderate. Now, obviously, if you need a minute, you need a minute. Nobody is saying you have to sprint out of the room in a panic. But if it is clear your steward is trying to service the cabin, the polite thing to do is give them the space to do it. Because if your steward keeps having to wait around for you to finally leave, they are not thinking, what a lovely relaxed guest. They are thinking, this cabin is making my whole day harder. Number 9, ignoring the do not disturb timing and then complaining the room is not done. This is one of those things that is completely unfair on your cruise steward because the passenger is often the one creating the problem and then acting annoyed about the result. They leave the do not disturb sign up for ages, stay in the room half the day, or keep the steward out during the normal cleaning window, and then later on they are suddenly wondering why the cabin still has not been serviced. And from the steward's side, that can be incredibly frustrating because they are not just responsible for your room. They have a whole section to get through, usually on a tight schedule, and if one room keeps blocking access, they cannot always magically drop everything and come back the exact second it becomes convenient for that one passenger. What makes it worse is when people act like the steward has done something wrong. They complain the towels have not been changed, the bed is not made, or the rubbish is still there, even though they were the one basically telling the steward to stay out. That is the kind of thing that makes a crew member think, seriously? What did you expect? Now, of course, if you want privacy for a while, that is your right. Use the sign. Nobody is saying otherwise. But you cannot block the room for hours and then be offended that the room is not magically cleaned on your personal timetable. Because if you ignore the cleaning window and then complain afterwards, your cruise steward is absolutely going to feel like you are making their job harder and blaming them for it. Number 10. Complaining about things they do not control. This is a big one, because passengers sometimes act like the cruise steward is responsible for absolutely everything that annoys them on the ship. The room feels too small. The air conditioning is too cold. The buffet was crowded. The neighbor was noisy. The ship is rocking. The Wi-Fi is slow. The excursion got changed. The toilet made a weird noise. And somehow all of that gets dumped onto the steward like it is their personal fault. And from the steward's side, that gets old very quickly. Because yes, they are there to help with cabin-related issues where they can, but they are not in charge of the weather, the itinerary, the ship design, the restaurant crowds, or half the random things passengers decide to moan about. So when someone keeps complaining to them about things they cannot actually fix, it starts to feel less like a genuine problem and more like being used as the nearest target. That is what makes this so frustrating. If there is a real issue in the room, fair enough. Tell them. If something needs reporting, they can often point you in the right direction or help get it sorted. But unloading every little irritation onto them just because they are standing there is unfair and honestly a bit thoughtless. Because after a while, your steward is not hearing, "This guest has a concern." They are hearing, "Great, here comes another complaint about something I have zero control over." Number 11. Asking for special extras but never showing basic courtesy. This is one of those things that really stands out because most cruise stewards are actually happy to help with reasonable extras. More pillows? An extra blanket? Ice? Fresh towels? A mattress topper? Maybe a robe? Maybe something small to make the cabin more comfortable. That is not usually the problem. The problem is when a passenger wants all the little extras, keeps asking for more, expects it all quickly, and still cannot manage basic manners. No smile, no please, no thank you, no sign that they even appreciate the effort. Just request after request, like the steward is some kind of vending machine for cabin comfort. And from the steward's side, that feels awful. Because those extras do take time. Sometimes they have to go find the item, check if it is available, come back later, or fit it in while juggling a dozen other rooms. So when somebody keeps asking for things and acts like it is all just automatic and beneath notice, it absolutely leaves a bad taste. Now, of course, you are allowed to ask for what you need. That is not the issue. The issue is acting like the request is all that matters and the person handling it does not matter at all. Because if your cruise steward keeps going out of their way to make your room better and you never show even the tiniest bit of courtesy, they are not thinking, "What a lovely guest." They are thinking, "Wow, this person really acts like I am invisible unless they want something." Number 12. Letting kids run wild in the cabin and hallway. This one is a huge one, because even if the kids are lovely, a cabin can become absolute chaos very quickly when nobody is keeping an eye on what they are doing. Beds become trampolines, towels end up everywhere, wrappers hit the floor, bathroom counters get covered in sticky mystery mess, and suddenly the room looks like a tiny cyclone came through it. And then there is the hallway part of it. Kids running up and down outside the cabin, shouting, slamming doors, leaving things in the corridor, pressing buttons, knocking on doors. All of that creates extra stress for crew and extra annoyance for other passengers too. And your steward is right there in the middle of it, trying to work around the noise, the mess, and the constant movement. Now, obviously, kids are kids. No one expects them to sit silently in a corner like little statues. That is not realistic. But there is a big difference between children enjoying the cruise and children being allowed to turn the cabin area into a free-for-all while the adults act like it is someone else's problem. Because from the steward's side, they are not looking at that situation and thinking, "Oh, what a fun family." They are thinking, "This cabin is exhausting." Number 13. Leaving food scraps around that attract smells and pests. This is one of those habits that might not seem like a huge deal in the moment, especially when people are tired, full, or just planning to deal with it later. Maybe it is half a burger left on a plate, fruit peels on the counter, crumbs all through the bed, dessert containers sitting there for hours, or room service leftovers pushed off to one side like they will somehow sort themselves out. But to a cruise steward, this is one of the quickest ways to make a cabin feel nasty. Because once food starts sitting around, the room changes fast. It can start smelling stale, sticky, and unpleasant, and it also creates extra mess that is much worse than normal clutter. Drinks get knocked over, sauces smear, crumbs end up everywhere. And on a ship, where cabins are small and the steward is moving quickly from room to room, that kind of mess is not just annoying. It is the sort of thing that makes them think these guests really do not care what state they leave the room in. And of course, it is not just about the smell. Food left lying around can attract unwanted little problems too, and no steward wants to walk into a cabin and see the kind of setup that invites that. Because leaving food scraps all over the place does not just say messy, it says disrespectful, lazy, and harder to deal with than it ever needed to be. Number 14. Leaving room service trays and rubbish sitting forever. This is one of those things that makes a cabin start feeling grim very quickly. A tray from breakfast sitting there all afternoon, empty glasses by the bed, wrappers on the desk, napkins stuffed on a counter, half-finished drinks, used plates just hanging around like they are part of the room now. It does not take much before the whole cabin starts looking tired and a bit gross. And from your steward's side, it gives off a really careless vibe. Because yes, they will clear things when they service the room, but when passengers just keep letting rubbish and trays pile up for ages, it starts to look like they are perfectly happy living in a mess as long as somebody else eventually deals with it. What makes it worse is that food trays and rubbish change the feel of a cabin fast. They take up space, they make the room smell stale, and they turn what should be a simple tidy-up into more of a cleanup operation. In a small cruise cabin, that clutter becomes obvious very quickly. Now, of course, nobody expects you to sprint a tray out the second you finish eating. That is not the point. The point is when people leave this stuff sitting there forever, like it is invisible, while more rubbish keeps building up around it. Because when your steward walks into a room and sees old trays, rubbish, and leftover mess still hanging around hours later, they are not thinking these guests are just relaxing. They are thinking these guests really do not care what kind of state they leave this room in. Number 15. Using every single towel like there is no tomorrow. This is one of those things that probably feels harmless to the passenger, because on a cruise, it can be easy to get into that holiday mindset of just grabbing a fresh towel every time you turn around. One for the shower, one for your hair, one for the pool, one for the floor, one for your feet, one because you felt like the first one got a bit damp and suddenly the room looks like a towel factory exploded. And from your steward's side, it gets old very quickly, because they are the one collecting all of that, sorting all of that, and constantly replacing all of that, all while handling a long list of other cabins doing exactly the same thing. So, when one room burns through towels like there is no tomorrow, it starts to feel excessive, wasteful, and honestly, a bit inconsiderate. Now, of course, use what you need. Nobody is saying sit there dripping dry to save the towel count, but there is a difference between using towels normally and acting like there is an unlimited towel fairy following you around cleaning up the aftermath of every minor splash or shower. That is what makes this stand out. It is not just the number of towels, it is the attitude behind it. It gives off that same vibe of, someone else will deal with it, so why should I care? Because when your cruise steward walks into a room and sees every towel used, every day, scattered absolutely everywhere, they are not thinking these guests are just enjoying themselves. They are thinking these guests are making extra work for no reason. Number 16. Moving furniture around and making the cabin harder to clean. This is one of those things some passengers probably think is harmless, because they are just trying to make the room work better for them. Maybe they drag a chair somewhere else, move the little table, shift things around near the bed, or rearrange bits of the cabin to create more space. And in their mind, it is just a small adjustment. But from your steward's side, it can be incredibly annoying, especially when it keeps happening. Cruise cabins are already tight, and they are set up that way for a reason. So when furniture gets dragged around, squeezed into awkward spots, or moved into places that make it harder to vacuum, clean, or even walk properly, it turns a simple room service into a more awkward job than it needed to be. It is even worse when people move things and then leave them there in strange positions all day, expecting the steward to work around it or silently put the whole room back together every single time. That is when it starts to feel less like a guest making themselves comfortable and more like a guest creating extra work for no real reason. Now, obviously, if you need to shift something slightly, that is not the end of the world. But when a cabin starts looking like somebody is redesigning it every day, your steward is definitely going to notice. Because if every cleanup means dragging furniture back, squeezing around awkward layouts, and fixing a room that was perfectly fine to begin with, your cruise steward is not thinking, how creative. They are thinking, please stop making this harder. Number 17. Blasting the TV or music while they're trying to work. This one feels rude almost immediately because your steward is standing right there trying to clean, change towels, make the bed, or sort the bathroom while the room is full of loud TV noise, music, or some video blasting away in the background like they are not even there. And yes, it is your cabin. Of course you can watch TV or play music in your own room. That is not the issue. The issue is when your steward is actively trying to work and the whole room is suddenly filled with noise they have to fight through while also trying to focus, hear you, and get things done properly. It also creates this strange vibe where it feels like the passenger cannot even be bothered making the space workable for 5 minutes. Like the steward just has to put up with whatever chaos is happening while doing the job. And if the volume is really loud, it can feel less like normal background noise and more like a weird little power move, even if that was not the intention. Now, obviously, nobody is saying you have to sit in silence the whole cruise, but if your steward is in the room working, turning the volume down or pausing it for a few minutes is just basic decency. Because if someone is trying to clean your cabin while your TV is blaring or your music is pumping through the room, your cruise steward is not thinking these guests are relaxed and fun. They are thinking these guests are making even this harder than it needs to be. Number 18. Staying up loud late at night and acting shocked when people notice. This is one of those things that makes your cabin stand out for all the wrong reasons because cruise stewards are around those hallways constantly and they know exactly which rooms are peaceful and which ones sound like they are hosting a little nightclub at midnight. Loud talking, yelling across the room, music pumping, doors banging, laughing fits in the corridor, people coming and going late. It all gets noticed. And the awkward part is when passengers act completely surprised that anyone noticed at all. Like somehow they thought all that noise was just disappearing into the air and not affecting the people next door, the crew in the hallway, or the steward who has to deal with that cabin again the next morning. Now, of course, people are on holiday. You can stay up late, you can have fun, you can enjoy yourself. That is not the issue. The issue is when the room starts feeling loud, chaotic, and inconsiderate, especially in a part of the ship where other people are trying to sleep and crew are still working. Because from the steward's side, that kind of cabin often comes with a pattern. Loud late night, messy room the next morning, extra rubbish, extra towels, extra attitude, and sometimes complaints from nearby cabins too. So yes, they notice. Because if your cabin keeps turning into the noisy one on the corridor, and then you act shocked that people have picked up on it, your cruise steward is not thinking these guests are just having a laugh. They are thinking these guests are exhausting. Number 19. Leaving embarrassing personal items out in full view. Cruise stewards have seen everything. Truly, everything. So this is not about them being shocked by the existence of normal adult stuff, medication, underwear, grooming items, or anything else people use in real life. The issue is when passengers leave really personal things spread all over the room in a way that makes the whole space awkward to clean. And that is what people forget. Your steward still has to come into that room and do their job. They have to make the bed, clean the bathroom, empty bins, wipe surfaces, refresh towels, and move around a very small space without pretending they are blind. So when somebody leaves very private items sitting right there in the middle of everything, it puts the steward in that uncomfortable position of having to work around it while acting like they did not see a thing. Now, of course, accidents happen, people forget things. Something gets left out. Fine. That is not really the problem. The problem is when it becomes a pattern, or when the room looks like the passenger has made no effort at all to put away things that are obviously personal and a bit awkward for another human being to be dealing with around them. It is not about being prudish. It is about basic consideration. Because there is a difference between living in your cabin and making the person cleaning it feel like they have walked into your private business in full display. Because if your steward keeps having to work around things that really should have been tucked away in a drawer, they are absolutely going to start feeling like you do not care how awkward you are making their job. Number 20. Bringing extra people into the cabin and hiding it. This is one of the biggest red flags, because your cruise steward knows very quickly when more people are using a cabin than are supposed to be in there. Extra towels disappearing, more beds being used, more mess, more rubbish, more noise, more people coming and going. It does not exactly take Sherlock Holmes to work it out, and from the steward's side, this is not just some harmless little secret. It creates more work, more awkwardness, and sometimes bigger problems if the room is being used in a way it was not meant to be used. A cabin is already a tight space, so when extra people are quietly sleeping there, hanging out there, or using the bathroom there, everything gets more crowded, more chaotic, and harder to stay on top of. What makes it worse is the sneaky part of it. Passengers doing this usually act like they are being clever, but to the crew it often just looks dishonest and annoying, because now the steward is left dealing with the extra mess and wear and tear while everybody pretends nothing unusual is happening. And let's be honest, it also puts the steward in an awkward position. They are not there to play detective, but they are also not blind. So when a cabin clearly has more people using it than should be, it creates that weird tension where the steward knows, the passengers know the steward knows, and everybody is pretending otherwise. Because if you are hiding extra people in the cabin, your cruise steward is definitely not thinking you are clever. They are thinking you are making the room harder to manage and dragging them into something they should not have to deal with. Number 21. expecting instant service during the busiest times. This is one of those things that really makes passengers seem unreasonable, because some people act like the second they want something, it should appear immediately, no matter what time of day it is or how busy the steward clearly is. Fresh towels right now, ice right now, extra pillows right now, bed made right now, and if it does not happen at once, the attitude starts. But cruise stewards are not just dealing with your room. They are often looking after a whole section of cabins, and there are certain parts of the day when everything hits at once. Morning cleanup, turnaround time, early evening requests, people coming back from the pool, families heading to dinner. Those busy periods are not quiet little gaps where your steward is just waiting for one more thing to do. That is what makes this so frustrating from their side. It is not usually the request itself. It is the expectation that your timing should instantly become their emergency, especially when the request is not urgent at all. It is just a passenger deciding they want something now and getting annoyed that the ship does not revolve around that exact moment. Now, of course, if you need something, ask. That is fine. But a little patience goes a very long way, especially when it is obvious the steward is in the middle of the busiest part of the day. Because if every request from your cabin comes with that "I want it now" energy, your cruise steward is definitely going to feel like nothing they do is ever fast enough for you. Number 22. Never saying thank you the whole cruise. This sounds small, but after a few days it stops feeling small. Because cruise stewards spend the whole week doing things for your cabin, making the bed, replacing towels, fixing little problems, bringing extras, clearing mess, and trying to keep everything running smoothly. And when all of that happens with not one thank you, not one bit of warmth, not one sign that the passenger even notices, it starts to feel pretty bleak. Now, nobody expects some big emotional speech every time fresh towels appear. That would be weird, but basic acknowledgement matters. A simple thank you, a smile, a quick bit of appreciation when someone helps you. Those tiny moments make a huge difference in any service job, especially one that is as full-on and physically demanding as this one. And from the steward's side, the silence says a lot. Because if a passenger asks for things all week, expects the room to be spotless, expects help when something goes wrong, and never once says thank you, it gives off the vibe that they think all of this just happens by magic. Like the person doing the work does not matter enough to even acknowledge. That is what makes it sting. It is not just bad manners. It makes the steward feel unseen in the most basic human way. Because if the whole cruise goes by, and you cannot even manage a single thank you, your cruise steward is absolutely going to feel like you do not just dislike the service. You dislike them. Number 23. Leaving the safe locked or the fridge jammed with your own stuff. This is one of those annoying little things that passengers often do without thinking, but from a steward's side, it can be surprisingly frustrating. Maybe the safe gets locked by accident and then left that way. Maybe the mini fridge is absolutely crammed with personal drinks, snacks, leftovers, medication, or random bits and pieces shoved in wherever they fit. To the passenger, it might feel like no big deal. To the steward, it is one more awkward thing to deal with in a very small space. And the safe especially can be a pain, because if it gets locked and something goes wrong, now it becomes another cabin issue that somebody has to sort out. It is not dramatic, but it is the kind of unnecessary hassle that adds up. The same goes for the fridge. Cruise cabin fridges are tiny to begin with, so when people jam them full of their own stuff, it can stop them working properly, make cleaning awkward, or turn the whole area into a cluttered mess. Now, obviously, you're allowed to use the safe and the fridge. That is not the issue. The issue is when they get treated carelessly and left in a state that just creates more work or more hassle for the person looking after the room. Because if your cruise steward keeps running into little problems like a locked safe or a fridge stuffed to the point of chaos, they are not thinking these guests are easy. They are thinking these guests turn every small thing into more work. Number 24. Removing the gratuities after good service without saying a word. This one really does leave a bad impression because from the steward's side, it can feel like they worked hard for you all week, kept the room clean, handled your requests, dealt with your mess, tried to be polite, and then right at the end, you quietly pulled the gratuities without ever saying there was a problem. Now, obviously, if the service was genuinely poor, that is different. If something was seriously wrong and you felt the steward did not do the job properly, then fair enough, that is your decision. But that is not what this is about. This is about passengers who get perfectly decent service, say nothing all cruise, act normal to the steward's face, and then remove the gratuities at the end like a little silent punishment. And that is what makes it sting. Because if there was an actual issue, at least say something. Give the person a chance to fix it. Let somebody know. But when everything seems fine, and then the gratuities quietly disappear anyway, it sends the message that all the effort meant nothing, and the steward often has no idea why. That kind of move does not just come across as cheap. It comes across as sneaky, especially when the passenger smiled all week, accepted all the help, and never once hinted that anything was wrong. Because if you remove the gratuities after good service without saying a word, your cruise steward is not thinking, "Oh well, fair enough." They are thinking, "Wow, after all that, this person really did hate me." Number 25. Acting like your cruise steward is invisible when they are one of the hardest working people on the ship. This is probably the biggest one of all, because it sits underneath so many of the others on this list. The mess, the rude tone, the constant demands, the lack of thanks, the chaos, the unrealistic expectations. A lot of it comes back to one thing. Some passengers start treating their cruise steward like they are just part of the room. Not a person. Not someone working unbelievably hard. Just someone who appears, fixes things, and disappears again. And that attitude shows. It shows when people talk over them, walk straight past them, avoid eye contact, leave the room like a disaster zone, keep asking for more while giving nothing back, and act as if the person doing all that work somehow does not deserve even the most basic respect. That is when a steward stops feeling like a crew member helping you and starts feeling like they are completely invisible to you unless you need something. Which is wild, really, because cruise stewards are doing one of the toughest jobs on the ship. Long hours, constant physical work, cabin after cabin after cabin, smiling through all kinds of passengers, all kinds of moods, and all kinds of mess. They are a huge part of what makes a cruise feel comfortable, clean, and easy, and yet some people treat them like background furniture. So if there is one thing to take away from this whole video, it is this. You do not have to be perfect. You do not have to keep the room spotless or act formal all week. But if you speak to your steward like a human being, show a little courtesy, keep the room reasonably manageable, and remember there is a real person behind the service, you are already doing better than a lot of passengers. Because at the end of the day, your cruise steward does not expect royalty-level treatment from you. They just do not want to feel like you hate them.